based on the things I've covered on this channel, The Defenders, The Punisher, most recently Black Mirror, it would be safe to assume that I'm either doing something very illegal, which I do not condone, or I have a Netflix subscription. Thankfully, it is the latter. And what that provides for the four of you who don't know is access to a variety of movies and TV shows without having to pay per show or per series or per film, unlike some other competitors who shall remain nameless. And, you know, it's a great way to have access to a variety of things to watch. It's certainly given me a lot of food for thought. But another good thing it does is promote new material being created. Within the last few years, Netflix has started to funnel some of that money into new projects. Kind of similar to normal network TV, I suppose. And it does make sense. You know, if you're asking people for money, if you're getting that money in from them, it would make sense to increase the value over time to your loyal subscribers and give them more of what they might want. Like with network TV, there are hits and there are misses. And you've already seen the title of this video, no doubt. And yeah, we're tackling one of the misses. And this is a shame. I really do want to love this. In every way possible. I really do want to love this piece. There's so much potential here that's just squandered, and it just makes me kind of sad. So first of all, I think the best way to tackle this is to look at the positives before we see why the positives didn't pan out. See if we can figure out from the materials we have how we got what we ended up with. So first of all, what most people, I suppose, see, quite literally, when they're looking at a new piece is the cast. And it is a great cast. We have Will Smith. Not that one. That one. And now, like me a few days ago, you're aware that there are two funny men named Will Smith. You can thank me later. But you know, he I think is at that point of his career he could give a half-bothered performance and it would still be okay, it'd still be passable. We obviously have Joel Edgerton, you know, in tons of makeup, really difficult to convey through, but he manages it. And big shout out to all the York actors, because they all managed to surpass the limitations. I know prosthetic technology has improved over the years, but it's still not as easy as just one's face without any obstruction. And also, if you have any dental appliances, as we've seen in the recent Star Trek series Discovery, it can really make things very difficult for the actor and for the audience, to be honest. So yeah, you know, all the York actors, you know, we have Noomi Rapace, who I think is underutilised in this, and Edgar Ramirez are two main elf people that we see, aside from, of course, Tika. But she comes in, I think, more on the problematic side, so we'll get to her later. The other big element, which was my main draw, it wasn't Joel or Will or anyone else, it was the fact that this was a fantasy world merged with our real world. You know, this has been a fascinating subject for me for many years. I grew up fascinated with folklore, and the idea of combining that with things that we know and see every day is a big draw for me. Many years ago, when I was young and dumb, not the third bit, you know, I created a world of my own, if you will. It's never been finished. But I was working in a big shiny building and I was thinking, well, maybe this would be like a headquarters for some kind of paranormal research and defense group, like a bureau. Anyone who's familiar with Hellboy knows where I'm going with that. But it was before I was even aware of Hellboy. I hadn't read any of the material. It was before Del Toro's films were out. So this was an entirely new concept for me. You know, the material had been out for years before. Mike Mignola had been working on it, but I wasn't aware of it. So weird confluence of ideas. But I will admit, kind of Mary Sued myself in a little as this kind of naive character, very much like Rupert Evans in the first Hellboy film. Not aware of it, just coming into it cold, just no idea what he's getting himself into. That was what I was, if you will, in this story. There's big love story and everything like that, portentous prophecies, very big, dramatic. It was going to be like, I think, at least a trilogy. You know, I was much more ambitious than I think I deserved to be when I was younger, but it's never come to fruition. But this is the kind of world I was thinking of. You know, it had elves, it had orcs, it had werewolves and vampires, because I'd grown up with Buffy. It had witches and demons and spriggans and brownies and fae folk. You know, all these kind of creatures. And it was, as I say, just this massive world which I've still got bits of floating around in my head. And, you know, at some point I'll do something with it. At the moment I think it's going to become a soundtrack to a film that doesn't exist. More musical kind of concept album. But, you know, this is what I was hoping from. This, not necessarily perhaps that kind of expansive world, you know, with all of those details. I didn't expect what I thought years ago to be on the screen, but I was expecting some really well-constructed fantasy-inspired real-world combo thing. And this is where we have to get into the less than good, because that isn't what I got at all. There are a number of issues. I mean, I suppose the one transitioning piece between the two is the writer being Max Landis. Yes, that Max Landis. You'd expect great things, but it just doesn't come off. This, I think, is the catchphrase, if you will, for this review. It just didn't come off. Whatever was intended, whatever was wanting to happen, just didn't come through. And I don't think it's just Max Landis' fault. Obviously, David Ayer directed it. He's got a hand. You know, there's probably higher ups who were pushing for certain things. You know, there were changes that were made. I mean, I did see a few videos on it, you know, and I'd already constructed most of my ideas, so I wasn't worried about it colouring it too much. It just helped fine-tune some of my points. And one thing that I did learn from that was that Tika was meant to be a young girl. This is why she seems so childlike. It's not because, like, elves age in weird ways or anything. She was meant to be a child, but of course there is that one scene where they go through the there's the gunfight in the
in a nasty ass titty bar.
Yeah, that. Which you really couldn't have had a small child in that scene, really. It would have been inappropriate. So they had to age her up, but they didn't change the writing. There are a few things that just happen that don't make sense. One of the things that, you know, I hadn't thought about, I will admit this isn't mine, was how Jacoby's resurrected, and he's seen as some messiah, not the person that resurrected him. Surely, if he'd come back of his own volition, fair play. You know, praise the guy as some kind of new messiah, all you want. But if someone else has made that happen, that's on them, not him. So it was one of the things that really rankled me. I wasn't really happy with that. You know, that's one of the small elements of the plot that didn't really work for me. Some of the pacing wasn't brilliant. You know, like right at the end, all of a sudden it's like, oh, have a stick, and they didn't set up the magic word. But I think one of the big glaring problems that a lot of people have had with this, and people better than I have covered it. I mean, some of my fine-tuning has come from Lindsay Ellis's video on it, you know, particularly about the lazy world building. I definitely advise going and watching that, because I think she covers some points much better than I can in brief here. But, you know, it is this whole idea of you had all this potential and you wanted to randomly shoehorn massive race allegories in, terribly, though. We have the idea that, you know, the orcs are our, you know, Afro-American kind of people, which is fine. You know, allegories are fine if they're done well. Ideally, you want to have applicability, which is the opposite. It's where the reader or the viewer brings their own experience. But if you want allegory and you do it well, that's fine. That's on you. But there's a lot wrong with it. You know, we didn't have a world with orcs in it for, you know, and elves and everything for over 2,000 years. I mean, there were 9 races. We only see 4 if you count the fairies, because we do see a centaur. You know, so the things that have led to some of our real world situations wouldn't have happened. The crypts are mentioned, but that's all stemming back. If you trace back a lot of this gang culture, it all basically comes from the treatment of people of colour as lesser by white people, which, you know, goes back to like slavery, etc., etc. Now, in a world where humanity's actually been pretty okay with it, you know, with various people of colour, it's been the actual other, like the elves and the orcs and such, you wouldn't have had those slaves, etc., so the crypts wouldn't exist. So referencing something that we know doesn't make sense. If it was only in the last 10, 20 years that they were known, fine. Everything else, you know, a lot of different pieces do this where they split at a time back. Fallout, for example, splits about the 1940s, 50s. So everything up to that point happened as it did, but then things changed. And this is fine, but you've got to have consistency with that. And this is what's lacking. I mean, the fact that they get a person of colour to say, you know what I'm going to say, I'm sure, fairy lives don't matter today. You've got a person of colour mocking the Black Lives Matter movement. If you can't see what's wrong with that, I don't know what more I can say. Just this one line says a lot about how tone deaf this film was. It was trying to make certain points and trying to make certain allegories, but it was ham-fisted, it was heavy-handed, it was shoved in there, and various parts of the plot didn't adjust around certain changes that were made. It's a mess. You know, I think the Metacritic score is like about 29 right now, as of me recording this, and that, I think, is generous. You know, maybe much of that score is from people going, but it's Will Smith or Joel Edgerton or anyone else they like. And maybe people like me who wanted to love it, just giving it more than they really should. I mean, I don't normally rate reviews, but I think, you know, about a 3 out of 10 would be about right for this, unfortunately, and that's counting in the things that I wanted to love. But this isn't the only recent Netflix misstep, sadly. There is another one which, again, had a lot of the same problems and a lot of the same promise, but we'll get to that next time. So I hope you'll join me then, but until then, as always, take care.